Okay, well, good morning, Doug, K2AD, and we're going to talk a little bit about my nerdy project, since this is Nerdfest, is I wanted to get back on HF again, and I moved to an HOA-controlled neighborhood, and how do I do that, and how do I relive my glory days? So when I was a young ham, you can see on the screen here, we had a friend of mine had a station outside Albany, New York, and he was very big into putting up large towers, building large monobanders, and I helped him with the 80 and 40 meter antennas. And we used to operate this station in contests, and if I needed to get a communication through, we could go up to Fred's house and run. This is only 2 of the 3 towers. So I felt a little bit like Uncle Rico here from Napoleon Dynamite of, nowadays I'm living out in Colorado, how am I going to throw that football over the mountains and get a big station? So what I kind of thought about is we have a number of these AT&T towers. We've got one here in the picture at Strasburg. We've got one in West Creek with access, down in Cedarwood or Avondale, however you want to call it, and one out at one of the newer guys to RMHAM. It's called Kutch, I guess, and John probably knows where that is. I haven't been out there, but these big towers, it's a nice vertical structure to mount things on, and up at the top, I've not been to the top of this one yet, but I know Tristan has. I believe there's a very large steel I-beam, I was told about 6 to 8 inch wide. Yeah, he's saying a big steel I-beam sticking out the top that we could mount a big rotator. And we like these rotators by Alpha Spid, and they have one called the Big RAS rotator, RAS. So I want to put a big RAS up here and put a big antenna on it. So my dream is a 40 meter through 10 meter antenna, maybe about a 40-foot boom. This is a big tower, it can handle it. So how do we get there? So I want to build a remote station. I started looking at all this stuff and said, well, I've got lots of pieces of this. I've got radios, I've got amplifiers, I've got switches, rotors, all these things, but they all require you pushing buttons and sitting in front of them. So we go to the radios, and these are 2 that I have. I have an Elecraft, and I bought an ICOM 7300. How do you remote these things? Well, you can buy ICOM software, and it's over here on the right of the picture. But it's push buttons, electronic push buttons, and when you try to turn the VFO, it's kind of like using this mouse laser pointer thing. Well, let me get it over here. I don't like that. I like pushing buttons and knobs. I have an Elecraft that has wonderful functions and buttons and knobs. So what do? Well, you get an Elecraft. And you notice this one is the short version. This is the short bus. This is all the buttons and knobs. And what comes out of it is there's a data port that you hook into. You put this box on this guy, you put this box on your Elecraft halfway across the state, and now all of a sudden, I have a VFO. I have buttons and knobs that I can work with. It just doesn't have any RF. This is the exact same pieces as my Elecraft. So I'm gonna start out, and part of the reason I'm doing this is I'm doing a little bit of cheerleading to say, is anybody interested in playing in the sandbox with me? We got a lot to do, but I'm probably going to start with this ICOM. I'm having trouble getting this thing to work, but the ICOM in the middle. And probably not use their software, but we'll probably use some third party that's out there, shareware, freeware, I don't know if it's licensed. But for those of you that can deal with this interface and have not purchased this, I don't know what this thing costs. Knowing it's Elecraft, it's probably $1,000. I forget what I paid for it, but if you don't have one of these, you're going to use one of those. The other pieces are, how do we get the rotators, the antenna switches? Everything has to be remoted, so I've started looking around, and I found a place in Russia that sells nifty little boards, and they found the nifty little relays that I couldn't find. And I'm going to mount all of these in an aluminum box. Unfortunately, this one has a control box that has 4 physical push buttons. Okay, so we're going to actually use this one for field day. So I've kind of got 2 goals here. But I also found a 6 port board. And very inexpensively, they had this Wi-Fi to relay output box that you can hook up and hook to this, and also we can potentially use this for field day, but you can Wi-Fi to this thing and from a control program. You're saying, why am I talking about a remote station at field day? Well, when we went to field day the past couple years, we put all of our stations. This is a direct throwback to wherever Mike Pappas is. There he is. He talked about all the VHF, UHF antennas on the roof. Well, we put all of our HF antennas within 50 to 100 feet of each other. All we did was listen to each other's prop wash. So this last year, we took one of our vans and we put it up on the hill, or there's a gentle rise, you know, it's maybe 30 feet higher. But it was 500 some feet away. I ran a 500-foot extension cord that we put 120 volts into the bottom, and I got about 105 out the top. But that was enough to run the battery chargers. And everything in the van ran off of 12 volts. But we had to physically go up there, and it's not a big thing. It's actually kind of nice because most people didn't want to make the hike, so we had a very quiet environment to sit and work CW and field day. But we could put our station remotely, put this thing in the comm trailer where everybody wants to be. So there's one person sitting on one table with a radio there, and another person sitting with one of these. They're sharing operating tips and things, but no prop wash between them. So that's why I'm looking at this for field day, and then we're going to reflect it out to the remote site. Out at that site, I've got to figure out how to get a decent antenna up there, and then how to build the rotator interface, because most rotator controllers expect buttons and knobs and analog meters that you got to push. Some of them have a USB or an Ethernet interface, but not all. But that brings us to another problem. So I'm going to start with, maybe I've been thinking about just a 160 meter. It's a big tower. That's a 140-foot tower in Stroudsburg. Put the inverted V, feed it with open wire line on 160 or 80, and just tune it. 600 ohm coming down to a tuner. It's a good start. And then I'm thinking, this is a picture of a JK antenna that I'm thinking about. The nice thing about these JKs, if you see these, I'm having trouble with the thing, this large element up here, you see a really big black blob. That's a Mongo bracket that I think might survive at 140 feet. And I put a quote here, if the antenna didn't fall down over the winter, it wasn't big enough. So we're going to try to figure out a big enough antenna. And how am I doing on time? But this is really the part that I figured we could talk about a little bit. And I guess I had a quote earlier that I went by that was by the guy that we built that first station in the first photo. And Fred always said, you buy what you can afford, you build what you cannot afford. And that's kind of the approach I'm using here. How do we get all of these things? As I say, I don't like the soft buttons. I prefer knobs and things that I can touch as opposed to this GUI, but it can't be too complicated. I don't want to have 12 windows precisely arranged on my screen and I can't see something. So we're looking at what do we have. Some people have said there's a program called Node Red, I think, others that we can integrate multiple windows on a single window so that you've got your whole station on a single pane of glass. I would love to have my logging program, my radio. You know, if we're at field day and we've got one computer and your radio is on the screen, how do you work your log? Are you constantly dragging between monitors and between windows? I'd like this thing to be a little bit, and I think that's the end. I intentionally am going very fast, so hopefully we have some questions, but I didn't want to go out of my window here. But how do we do this thing? I'm looking at building antenna switches. We're going to be doing rotators. Now, the rotator controller that we use by Green Heron, that I had a couple of slides back, this guy over in here, this thing just doesn't like me today. The last time I used it, it was wonderful, but this guy right here, the newer ones have an Ethernet interface, so it can be direct in. Otherwise, I've got to have the site computer at the remote station talking USB to this thing, and there's another window. There's the big RAS right there in the middle, the rotator, but I'm also looking at some remote switches. Beyond these will only take 100 watts, and, well, I don't want to stay at 100 watts. We can legally do 1,500, so when we need it, I want to be able to light this thing up. So that's kind of my thoughts on a remote station. I hope this is nerdy or geeky enough for this audience here. This is Nerdfest, wherever Willem is. Am I a big enough nerd, Willem? Geek. I'm proudly accept that.
You called us geeks. We are nerds. We're not geeks.
Well, I'm trying to be nerdy and geeky. The big thing that I'd like to think about is I just have to maybe wait for my tax refund. Is that Elecraft KPA, they have two models, a 500 watt model, KPA 500, and they have a KPA 1500. The neat thing about the 1500 is it is a little more power, probably run it a little bit under full power, but the KPA 1500 has an Ether connection on the back, so it gets an IP address, and it has an antenna tuner built in, and it has multiple coax switches in there. So from the Elecraft radio, you can change your frequency, and the amplifier says, oh, he's on this frequency. I need to pre-tune myself because we've trained it what the antennas are. So when we change bands, it changes antennas, changes its tuner. That's a nice thing when you're remote. But I don't want it to get too complicated, because when it's too complicated,
it just won't work.
Thank you, John. So that's some of the thoughts. Maybe when they come out with the Elecraft K4, which I didn't put a picture up here, that also has a direct Ethernet, and you could just dial into it with your web browser. You'd be using soft buttons. You can't have this kind of thing on the K4, but all of that capability is reflected back to you at the remote station. So that's my nerdy project. I'm trying to do something other than build repeaters and microwave. I'm trying to build something that I can have some fun with when I just want to get on 75 meter YAM and tune into the 3885 to the piss and moan net and listen to their pissings and moanings from the East Coast. That is a real net, or at least it used to be, and I miss being able to listen to it. So, any questions, thoughts? I guess I have, what, about 5 minutes?
Doc, life is too short for QRP.
Yes, and when we built Fred's station here, this was my best recollection. I built the 80 meter antennas here, which were 2 delta loops and 2 delta loops. And we electronically switched 2 of them through a coil to lengthen them, to make them a reflector. So we could shoot at Europe or to the southwest towards the Pacific on 80 meters. And at 1,500 watts, we only ran legal power. We never ran illegal power. We said, if you want to run a backyard station and run 3 kilowatts, fine. But we've got real antennas. We're going to stay at the legal limit. But you could just sit there running pileups on Europe all night long. So yes, life is too short for QRP, but it's got to be legal. So,
Doug?
yes.
Comment from Chad. Bob Sterner suggests that ERCM by Vibraplex is a good solution for network control of routers.
RCM.
Of rotors.
RC
ERC-M.
ERCM. Okay, well, thank you, Bob, and greetings to Michigan, whichever camera I'm on here. Greetings. Hope you're doing well out there. And it's ironic we're here at Cherry Creek Schools, where you were. So we'll take a look into that. We just gotta find all these solutions that are nerdy enough that we can integrate them in to our thing. Anything else from online or in the room?
Just make a comment that if you make it too simple, it's not nearly nerdy enough.
Well, what I'm referring to is one of our, I think he's actually a charter member of RMHAM, Scott Burkhart, W0KU. He's got that incredible radio voice, and I was out at a field day or VHF contest, and he looks at my sequencer that's running my 2-meter 1,500 watt amplifier that we named the Chernobyl because it melted things down. It's melted multiple things. And it literally had a meltdown. But I've got the sequencer into the amp, into the filters, into the receive preamp, and he looks at it and he goes, "It's too complicated, it's not gonna work." And then he found it worked perfectly, but he always says if it's too complicated, it's not gonna work. So,
One more from the
Yes.
from the chat. Doug N6UA asked if you're considering Flex with a Maestro. If you could buy a Maestro.
The Flex is a great radio. I don't have one. I'm buddies with the CTO of Flex, but so I have nothing against them. But no, I don't have one. If you have one and you want to take that investment and put it out at a site, that would be a great radio. That really would be a great radio. But I just didn't go down that path. I started down the Elecraft path because the receiver in the Elecraft was, in my opinion, superior to all the rest. We'd used them in multi-multi contests, and the biggest testimonial was we ran Elecrafts and Flex up at the 100th anniversary of WWV, where we actually set up towers, stations, antennas immediately outside the chain link fence, looking up at the 200-foot towers with 10 kilowatts of 2.5, 5, 10, 15, 20 megahertz coming out. And the Flexes were a little bit bothered, but the Elecrafts didn't care. The Elecraft didn't care, so that's why I went with the Elecraft. But the Flex is a wonderful radio for features and such. So
Maestro ordered some 2021 ham invention. Still don't have it.
I can talk to Steve for you, but I doubt he's going to get any more pull. It's just components shortages, but yeah. So
One more, Doug.
yes.
Ed KAH-JMW says he uses an ICOM RSBA1 software with the ICOM RC28 remote encoder, the actual physical knob.
Yes.
On a PC.
So he's talking about, I think, a later version. This is, I think, the 2 software, but ICOM does have software. So Ed, I think you're using the original OEM ICOM software. Is that? And you can type that back into the chat. And Dave, since I'm coming close to my time and I want to stay on.
He says he has RS-BA1 version 2.
Okay, I think that's what I showed, screen capture I grabbed here. So this is another option. Some people like this software, other people, the contest community says they do not like this software. But the Ragchi community seems to like it. So I may very well try this with the 7300 that I bought. We had a local ham that had a heart attack, and his widow was trying to, I said, I'll buy the rig. I think it's had 3 QSOs on it. And so I'm going to figure out something to do with it. It's kind of like, you know, skiers buy skis, women buy shoes. I buy radios because, I don't know, I need another radio. But we're going to maybe try that software, maybe try the other software. But one of the neat things is ICOM basically makes, and I'll then wrap this up, it's a little box about this big. It's got a VFO, and I think it's got 2 push buttons that you can program so that you actually could tune the band and have a couple of functions. I have to learn more about it, but that would be an option. And so if RMHAM and I have one of these somewhere, you could get the minimal setup and have a real station that we could share. So.